Today I'm going to be talking about 10 ways iOS is just better than Android. And obviously this is personal opinion, so do not take this for gospel. If you have a different opinion, do not go hating. This is just what I think. So first thing I would definitely have to say is that when you look at the Android lineup, you've got so much selection. You have the folding devices, you have the bending devices, you have just the normal slab phones, you have beefy camera phones, you have beefy battery phones. You have so much selection, whereas compared to iPhone, everything is so limited down. You have, at the moment, we have the iPhone 12 all the way to the 15 Pro. And it's a good thing in some ways. If you have a refined lineup, people can just pick the phone they like and the one that they want, and it makes life 10 times easier for a lot of people because they don't want to have to be thinking about what type of fold or what type of slab phone they're going to get. They just want to have a phone that's already been sort of chosen for them. The phone that, Apple has decided will be best for them. And this is honestly one of the reasons why I always think that if someone is new to getting a smartphone, they should get an iPhone. It's simple and the product line is so much easier to understand than an Android. I always think for a lot of people, if they keep their phones for longer, you should definitely get an iPhone. I mean, if you just look at iPhones compared to Android, number one, the software support is way better. But number two, they get more major software updates. They don't just get security updates. They get all the new features that the flagships are getting. And I think that's honestly really, really good because it means that people can keep their phones for way longer and there's no worry about, oh, I'm going to be missing out on features. It's going to be easier for me to get hacked. It's so much easier for people to keep a phone that's basically the same across the lineup. I mean, as long as you've got, the wallpaper changing and you've got the main features that the new iOSs are getting, a lot of people won't care because I know people that keep their phones not even updated and they don't care. All they like is the fact that iPhone's software is so much easier to understand than Android's. And I do understand that, but obviously it is very personal and a lot of people are going to decide which software they like from a younger age or just whichever one they picked first. A lot of people aren't willing to branch out and go, yeah, I've been with iPhone my whole of my life, but I could try Android. So that is one main feature I definitely have to say for iPhone is their security updates and their software updates are just so unmatched compared to Android at the moment. Definitely have to say the Apple ecosystem is way better than the Android ecosystem in some ways. Now, Google's ecosystem is obviously very widespread, and so is Samsung's. If we look at Google and Samsung's ecosystem, Google, they've got their smart home features, they own Nest, so you have a lot of integration there. And then you also, with Samsung, you have fridges, TVs, you have tablets, you have watches, you have everything. It's not something on Google's part, but I definitely have to say, out of the ecosystem, Apple just integrates everything so nicely. Everything is so much easier to understand. Android does have a lot of the similar features that as Apple have, but it's not talked about as much and it's not as easy to access as Apple's. And I definitely have to say that if you are considering going into a whole product line, Apple is definitely going to be the best for you. You get the laptop, you get the watch, you get the AirPods, you get the phone, you get the TV. You can basically get everything, and the iPad, but who really cares about the iPad? But when you think about an ecosystem, you think about Apple, you think about how everything's easy to copy and paste over, you think about AirDrop, you think about iMessage, you think about FaceTime, you think about the whole ecosystem as a whole. And I honestly have to say that I've been in both camps. I've been in an Android ecosystem and an iPhone ecosystem, and everything just works so much smoother on iPhone. And you won't understand it until you've swapped. There's just subtle little things. Like on my Apple Watch, I had a Pixel Watch a couple months ago, and I really did enjoy it. It's just that, the software isn't as optimized for the tiny screen, the chip isn't as good, so the watch is slow, and sometimes it would just straight up disconnect from my Pixel, which was really inconvenient. But it's those little things that just add up, and it's the same for the earbuds. They don't link as seamlessly, they don't have the same sort of Siri saying stuff in your ear. You just notice it more that Android doesn't have as much as those same smoothness. Apple optimizes everything so much more because they only have fewer products to refine for. They have products that everyone can use, everyone can understand so much easier. I really do think that's a good thing. Now, if we're looking at both camps, iPhone and Android obviously both have a lot of the same apps. It's just app developers tend to optimize their apps more for iPhone. Now, I've definitely found this. For number one, now, I'm obviously young. I use Snapchat a lot. It is one of my main, ways I communicate with people because a lot of my generation like using Snapchat. It's a good app. You can send pictures and you can send messages a lot easier. But on Android, on my S23 Ultra and my Google Pixel 7 Pro, I noticed that Snapchat is just so much slower, sluggish, the camera performance isn't as good. And no matter what people say, Samsung's optimized it for Snapchat, they haven't optimized it the same way as iPhone. There's still a delay where they're processing the picture. There's also the app just being slow, messages opening slower, getting messages come through slower. It is definitely a big difference, and you notice it. It's those things that just add up. It's the small things. Instagram, everything's just not the same. Everything seems to be way bigger for some reason. The app is slow. It's not as smooth. I definitely found that every single app that I opened just didn't feel as optimized, and it leaves this funny feeling in your stomach. The thought of me going back to Android kind of scares me in some ways, because I can swap between both of them easily. It doesn't bother me being in an ecosystem as such, but when it's not being as smooth as what I'm used to, and things just aren't working how they should, I just think, what's the point? I like Android and I love the features it has, and in some ways I prefer it to iOS, but for my use cases, I use social media a lot, and a lot of my other friends use iMessage and FaceTime. It makes more sense for me to have an iPhone. As much as I want to experiment with getting foldable phones, flippable phones, just the flagship Android phones, I just find that I struggle to do that now. Because I know I've had multiple different Android experiences with tablets, and I've had 2 Android phones in the space of a year, and I swapped back to iPhone because of those little things that add up and are just get annoying after a while. You do not notice the smoothness and the fluidity of iOS until you go to Android, and I definitely have to say that is true. Now, one thing I definitely have to say is that on Android, you're presented with more third-party apps. Now, what I mean by this is Apple likes to make all their own apps. Every single thing that Android makes, Apple has got its own version for. Now, when I went over to Samsung, they have got Outlook, Microsoft, because they've done a partnership with Microsoft. So you've already got the whole Office 365 suite on there, whether you wanted it or not. And you've also got Spotify on there. You've got a bunch of other different apps on there. You've also got 2 app stores. You've got the Play Store and the Galaxy Store. All these things add up. I mean, you don't ask necessarily to have these apps, but they're just given to you. Now, they have changed this as of recently, where you can choose to not install them when you set up the phone, other than Office 365. It's a really random thing, and I don't know why. Also on my Pixel, obviously you're given all of Google's counterparts, and that's absolutely fine. Now obviously it just depends what Android phone you go for and how much they decide to bloat the software. For Google, they don't do this as much because they own Android. They've got their own versions of everything. But for companies like Samsung, they need to have their own versions of stuff. I mean, they've got Samsung Pay. I mean, when you go over to Samsung, you've got Samsung Pay, Google Wallet, Office 365, the Notes app. You've got 2 different contact apps. You've got the Contacts app for Google, and you've got the Samsung Contacts app. You've also got 2 different messaging apps, the Samsung version and the Google version. You've also got 2 different galleries, the Samsung Gallery and the Google Photos Gallery. And whilst we're speaking about the gallery, you also don't get iCloud backup the same way as you do with iPhone, where once it's all backed up to the cloud, it will keep it on your device for a couple of days and then just take it off your phone, which I think is very good for storage, because I like to keep my more apps than I do photos. So for me, it makes sense that it would just back up and delete. Whereas when I was on my Samsung phone and Google phone, they just like to keep stuff locally and not delete anything. And the Samsung Gallery app does not sync or play that well with Google Photos. You have to realistically do it all manually, and everything is so much more clunky on Android with all this third-party software, and Samsung trying to compete with Google and Google trying to compete with Samsung. It adds this layer of bloatware and just stuff you don't want to be on there, and it does cause a lot of grief and issues for me personally. Now, one other thing I definitely noticed was battery life. When I switched to Android, I went from an iPhone 12 Pro Max to an S22 Ultra, which everyone was saying at the time was the best phone for battery life. Now, obviously, I live in the UK, so I did get the Exynos version at the time, which sucks. I didn't like it, and this could be why my experience was worse. The battery life was awful. I mean, it was literally not usable. That's how bad it was. I would start the day with 100%. I'd go on TikTok for 5 minutes, and my phone would already be on 90%. That's crazy. Using the camera app would tank my battery. Don't get me wrong, it makes my battery life go lower on my 14 Pro Max, but nowhere near as much on Android. And people said it will get better after a couple of days. Just let it optimize itself. No, I do not care what anyone says. It does not happen. It's just impossible for the battery life to get longer. I definitely find that Android just has so much bloatware and so much things that are going on in the background that the battery management is just so bad that you can't use the phone as well. And this is what scared me and was a big reason why I didn't switch to the Fold, was that phone is massive and that phone has got a smaller battery, and the battery life, I would be going from what is a tank to a sedan. Like, it's a massive difference in terms of battery life, and I definitely say if you are a fan of your battery life, stick with iPhone, because there is nothing like iOS's optimization for battery life, so definitely do go for an iPhone if you want more battery life. Just don't even question that. One of the main thing, which I've sort of touched on, is that iMessage is a massive part of why I stay with iPhone. FaceTime, iMessage, the integration between devices, AirDrop, it makes it very difficult to switch. Now, I never really cared about iMessage. I mean, I use WhatsApp, use SMS. It doesn't really bother me. Green bubble, blue bubble, do whatever. But what I noticed more was FaceTime, AirDrop. Those little things that just add up that people can just use so easily. I tried to use Nearby Share with my other friend that has an Android phone, and we were sat there for 10 minutes trying to figure out how the thing worked. It's just those things on Android that just don't make sense to me. Why is that not just working the same way as it works on my iPhone? When you're using Bluetooth devices, all your audio will just go straight, like your notification sounds will go through the car. The car doesn't play as well also with Android phones. The quality isn't as good, and the Bluetooth connection can just drop out. Now, I don't know if this is just my experience, but I definitely noticed that Bluetooth devices are nowhere near as good on Android as they are on iPhone. So definitely do take that into consideration, that everything just doesn't play as well with each other, and you will miss out on iMessage and FaceTime and just those features that are so taken for granted when you're just in that ecosystem. iPhones have a very unique design. You can notice an iPhone from a mile away. It's very non-branded, and they do not really have to show anything new on the phone to make it sound amazing. Now, I definitely say design is definitely subjective, and I personally think that the Pixel lineup in general is one of the best looking phones we've had. I just think that iPhones have this certain way of just making people want to buy them. The colors, the way it looks, the seamless, just the way everything looks is so much nicer on iPhone in some ways. But design is so subjective. I can't sit here and say, oh yeah, the design is better on iPhone than it is on Android. But it's definitely one of those things to take into consideration. People will notice if you have an iPhone, and for some reason, people care about that. So, you've just got to take that into consideration. The design on the iPhone is nicer if you want people to look at you and go, wow, he's got an iPhone. It's just that design is so subjective that that's just the way it is. Now, definitely the last thing I have to say is accessories on iPhone is insane compared to the amount there are for Android. I mean, I was looking for a Samsung S22 Ultra case. There is a lot of selection, but when you go onto iPhone, there is literally cases upon cases upon cases. MagSafe, there is so many now that there just isn't on Android. Well, there's way more accessories on iPhone. Why would I go onto Android where there's less accessories? It's just one of those things that people are really picky about and just tend to care about compared to, Android where there's less accessories. More people like the accessories on iPhone, they tend to look better and they tend to be cheaper because there's so many more companies making them. It's just ridiculous. If you look on Amazon, there is literally pages upon pages. And I don't have to say my final thoughts is that I am going to make another video where 10 reasons why Android is better than iOS, but without a shadow of a doubt, no one can sit here and deny the fact that Android isn't as smooth as iPhone, and there's just definitely things that people are going to want from an iPhone that you just don't get on Android. App optimization is main thing. The iMessage is another big thing for a lot of people, and being in the Apple ecosystem makes it very difficult to leave. Now, there's a couple of things Android could potentially learn from iPhone, maybe making the apps more optimized, making things smoother, trying to get third parties to make the apps more optimized. Definitely, that would be nice. But we can't sit here and expect, Android to be trying to do everything. It is a lot of the ways down to developers. They don't want to sit there and optimize the apps for Android phones because there are so many different versions. You can't sit there and optimize it for, an Asus phone and a Samsung phone and a Google phone and a OnePlus phone. It makes it very difficult, and you can't expect that from every developer, especially with whatever the hell's going on with Twitter at the moment. They don't even have enough people to optimize the iOS app, let alone the Android app. But my final thoughts are, iPhone and Android, both very good operating systems, and there will be another video coming about why Android is better than iPhone. I'd just like to say I'm sorry for the lack of uploads. You know, there's a lack of content for me as a small channel to create at the moment, so that's why there hasn't been as much content as there was. I'm hopefully going to be getting some new devices soon to be able to review and come back at, but I do appreciate all the support I've been getting. But it's been Harry. I'm out. Peace.